Hi, I'm Lino Wang and welcome to Discovering China, the show that brings the ancient civilization of the East right into your living room. Coming up today, Margaret Tri takes a look at Chinese garden art at the Met Museum, and Ben Hedges takes us through the history of the Han Dynasty. In previous episodes, we explored how classical Ming-style gardens served as an idyllic retreat for ancient Chinese scholars. Now, Margaret Tri visits the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art and shares with us the timeless beauty of Chinese gardens captured in different forms of art.
For centuries, the traditional Chinese garden has been an idyllic paradise and a source of creative inspiration for scholars and artists. In traditional Chinese culture, the garden is a place to discover oneself. The garden serves as a place for self-cultivation, solitary contemplation, as well as for social or literary gatherings. For the first time, the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art displays its entire permanent collection of artwork, celebrating these recurring themes in Chinese gardens.
It introduces 1,000 years of Chinese painting history, all focused on the theme of Chinese gardens and how gardens have been an inspiration throughout the centuries.
Chinese gardens, pavilions, studios, retreats features over 60 paintings, together with ceramics, carved bamboo, lacquerware, metalwork, textiles, and photographs. Met Museum Asian Art Department head and curator of the exhibition, Mike Hearn, talks about the key themes and elements in Chinese gardens.
They initially were built to attract immortals, and immortals are another theme that percolates throughout garden history. As well, we have pavilions, which were always the focal point in gardens of either you built a pavilion at a beautiful spot for the view, or it became itself part of the view.
One of the highlights of the exhibition is the Palace of Nine Perfections by a 17th century artist. The splendor of the traditional Chinese garden is set in 12 hanging scrolls, presenting an imaginary landscape of a 7th century palace. The Imperial Garden is a source of inspiration, of imaginary creations of what an immortal's dwelling place would look like.
Of course, reclusion and withdrawal from politics and the dusty world of commerce is a major theme. So we have a number of images that talk about and illustrate the idea of withdrawal into the landscape, escaping either changing dynasties or commercial pressures.
The Chinese character for bottle looks like a Han Dynasty bottle with a lid on it. Hearn explains how this became a way to find immortal happiness for the Taoist painter, whose nickname was Square Bottle.
A bottle was a metaphor for a world you could escape into. You could make yourself small, go into the bottle, or go into a gourd and find another universe there.
Every art piece tells a story, like the palace banquet. This is a hanging scroll in ink and color on silk, dating back to the late 10th to 11th century. The painting depicts a narrative sequence of the rendezvous between Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty and his imperial consort, Yang Guifei.
The sad ending of the story is that so infatuated was the emperor with Yang Guifei that he neglected the affairs of state, and An Lushan rebelled, forcing the emperor to flee, and the palace guard refused to take the emperor to safety unless they put Yang Guifei to death.
Another recurring theme focuses on how gardens serve as a venue for literary gatherings. This is best illustrated in the gathering at the Orchid Pavilion, a hand scroll in ink and color on paper. It tells the story of a well-known calligrapher, Huang Xizhi, and his friends meeting at the Orchid Pavilion to hold a poetry competition. Cups of wine float downstream as poets compose their verses by the meandering river.
This legend of this extraordinary outdoor gathering was a terrific inspiration to later garden designers who often loved to create these winding waterways.
Till January 6, 2013, Chinese art lovers will be able to feast their eyes on this collection of Chinese gardens, pavilions, studios, retreats at the Met Museum of Art in New York City.
The Han Dynasty is sometimes called China's first golden age. After the brutal rule of the Qin, the Han ruled over a period of stability and cultural development that lasted 400 years. Ben Hedges now brings us the story of the Han.
The Han Dynasty began in 206 BC, when a man named Liu Bang, who had been born a peasant, led a group of generals to overthrow the Qin dynasty. This started a 400-year period of prosperity, sometimes referred to as China's first golden age. The capital of the dynasty was at Chang'an, and at the time it was one of the biggest cities in the world. The Han Dynasty saw massive territorial expansion, with China's area almost doubling. The Han defeated the tribes to the north and signed treaties with the clans to the west. This made travel safer and led to the establishment of what became known as the Silk Road. This was the trade route connecting China with the Roman Empire, thousands of miles away in Europe. The Han also saw massive cultural developments, with Confucianism, which had been suppressed under the Qin, rising to become the state philosophy of China's aristocracy. Officials were evaluated on their conduct according to the Confucian values, and an imperial university was established to train them. It was also during the Han period that Buddhism spread to China from India. Buddhism's emphasis on compassion and universal salvation appealed to the masses. Along with Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhism became one of China's three main religions that would dominate the faith of the Chinese people for the next 2,000 years. The Han Dynasty gave rise to some of China's most well-known historical figures, such as Sima Qian, who wrote the Record of the Grand Historian, the definitive record of China's early history, and also Han Xin, the general who helped Liu Bang establish the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was briefly interrupted in the year 9 AD, when the nephew of the empress, Wang Mang, seized the throne. 14 years later, Liu Xiu, a descendant of Liu Bang, eventually toppled him, and the Han Dynasty, with 12 more emperors, continued for another 200 years. But like all dynasties in Chinese history, the Han could not last forever. It officially ended in the year 220 AD. Trouble at court and uprisings across the empire led to its eventual downfall. The warlord Dong Zhuo led troops into the capital, kick-starting the battles between various warlords. Eventually, Cao Cao managed to establish the Wei state north of the Yangtze River. Sun Quan established the Wu state to the south of the Yangtze, and Liu Bei the Shu state in the west, starting the period known as the Three Kingdoms.
Now, have you ever wanted to learn Chinese? Well, NCD has a Learn Chinese series on YouTube. You can check out the first video right here. But from the team here at Discovering China, see you next time.